Can you feel your feet right now? Can you control them? Because in July 1518, a woman completely lost that control. Her feet began to move and never stopped. She danced for 4 days straight without music, without stopping to eat, without stopping to sleep. And then something terrifying happened. Others began to imitate her one by one, dozens, hundreds, until 400 people were trapped in a deadly dance through the streets of Strasbourg. They danced until they bled, threw themselves until they passed out. Some danced until they died. What you're about to discover shouldn't have been possible, but it happened. And the authorities at the time made a mistake that made everything infinitely worse. This is the most disturbing epidemic in human history, and it can teach us something terrible about ourselves. But who was this woman who unleashed the horror? Frau Troffea, an ordinary citizen of Strasbourg, mother, wife, someone you could pass on the street without a second glance. Until that day in July, when something inside her simply snapped. It was a warm morning when she left her house, and her feet touched the cobblestones of the narrow street. And then it began. There was no festival, no celebration, just a woman dancing alone, her movements strange and frantic as if fleeing from something invisible. People stopped to watch, first with curiosity, then with concern, because Frau Troffea didn't stop. Hours turned into days. One day became 2. She didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't sleep, just danced with her eyes glazed over as if in a trance. And that's when the impossible happened. On the 3rd day, a man in the crowd began to move, first discreetly. Then his feet began to follow her rhythm. Within minutes, he was dancing beside Frau Troffea with the same blank expression, the same silent desperation. The crowd recoiled in terror, realizing they were witnessing something that defied all logic. Within a week, 30 people had already been infected. What began as one woman's madness was turning into an epidemic no one could comprehend. But why Strasbourg? Why Strasbourg at that precise moment in history? To understand the horror unfolding in the streets, you need to immerse yourself in the suffocating world of 1518, because Strasbourg wasn't just any city, it was a pressure cooker about to explode. Imagine living in a place where famine had devastated entire families the previous year, where children died of malnutrition, while the rich hoarded grain, where the Black Death still haunted the collective memory, and death could knock at your door at any moment. Strasbourg was a cauldron of tension. Peasant protests erupted in the streets. New religious sects promised salvation while preaching the end of times. The summer heat made the air unbreathable, and urban poverty created a palpable desperation you could feel, walking through the narrow alleys. People lived on edge, exhausted workers, desperate mothers, men who had lost everything. Their bodies and minds were stretched to the breaking point. And when Frau Troffea began to dance, she wasn't just expressing her own madness. She was channeling the silent suffering of an entire city. It was as if all that pent-up pain, all that collective anguish, had found an outlet. And that outlet was dance, the deadly dance that was spreading like wildfire. But what the authorities did next transformed a local tragedy into a nightmare that would mark history forever. They looked at hundreds of people dancing to exhaustion and thought, we need more music. Yes, you heard right. As bodies collapsed in the streets, as people bled from their cracked feet, as despair consumed the city, the authorities built stages, hired musicians, and ordered the dancing to continue. Their logic was simple and terribly flawed. If they danced until they were completely exhausted, the curse would be broken. The result was hell on earth. The streets of Strasbourg were transformed into a macabre theater. Imagine walking through the city and seeing bodies writhing in agony, moving in frenetic rhythms under the scorching sun. Blood streaked the dancers' path. Interrupted screams mixed with hysterical laughter. Chroniclers of the time describe scenes that still chill the blood today. People dancing with their eyes rolled back, foam coming from their mouths, movements so violent that bones broke. Some fell mid-dance and never got up again. Others danced over the bodies of those who had died. 15 people died every day. 15 from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer physical exhaustion. And yet the music kept playing. That was when the authorities realized they had fed the very demon they were trying to exorcise. And in utter desperation, they did something that would change everything. In August, with bodies piling up and the city on the brink of total collapse, the authorities did something they never imagined. They admitted they were completely lost. Medicine had failed, logic had failed, Only one last desperate hope remained. God, but not just any saint. They turned to Saint Vitus, ironically the patron saint of involuntary dancing itself. It was like asking the devil to cast out demons. The town's doctors, who until then had insisted it was just too much hot blood, finally bowed their heads. Theories of astrological influences or demonic possession seemed ridiculous in the face of the actual carnage. They were dealing with something beyond any understanding of the time. The decision was made, a mass pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Vitus more than 50 kilometers away. What followed was one of the most disturbing scenes in medieval history. Hundreds of dancers were shod in blessed red shoes, because even shoes needed divine protection. They were tied, carried, and dragged along the dusty paths. Some still danced along the way, writhing against the ropes, moaning and laughing simultaneously, as if possessed. Imagine the procession, a multitude of bodies convulsing under the scorching sun, heading toward a shrine that maybe, just maybe, could break the curse the city itself had fostered. And then something miraculous began to happen, or perhaps something even more terrifying. The collective mind finally found an outlet, and it was at the shrine of St. Vitus that the impossible happened. The miracle of modern science explaining medieval horror. When the dancers touched the saint's statue, some collapsed instantly, as if a switch had been flipped in their brains. Others took days to stop completely. It wasn't magic, it was something far more disturbing. The devastating power of the collective mind. Today we know the terrifying truth behind the Strasbourg epidemic. It wasn't demons, it wasn't hot-bloodedness. It was something that haunts us to this day. Mass collective death, Frautrophia, and hundreds of other people weren't possessed. They were broken. Broken by hunger, by desperation, by unbearable social pressure. Their brains found an escape valve in the most primitive form possible, compulsive movement. And here's the part that should terrify us. This still happens today. When you lose yourself in your cell phone for hours, unable to stop, when you feel that seemingly endless anxiety, when an entire community goes into collective panic on social media, you're seeing echoes of Strasbourg. The difference is that in 1518, they danced themselves to death. Today we become addicted to it until we destroy ourselves. Different eras, the same human pain-seeking escape. What happened in Strasbourg wasn't an isolated event in medieval history. It was a dark mirror of the human condition, a warning that when we ignore collective suffering for too long, it explodes in the most unexpected and devastating ways. And the question remains, what will our death dance be? What escape valve is our generation unknowingly creating? So I ask you again, can you feel your feet right now? Can you control them? Because maybe the real question isn't why those people danced themselves to death in 1518, but rather, what are you compulsively doing today without realizing it? What is your modern death dance? If this story made you question something about our times, you're not alone. Thousands of people are discovering that history teaches us more about the present than we imagine. And since you've made it this far, which already shows you have a thirst for true knowledge, I'm sure you'll be fascinated by the next story I've prepared. It's appearing on your screen right now, and honestly, it's even more disturbing than this one. Oh, and tell me in the comments what you think is the deadly dance of our generation. Social media consumerism anxiety. Your answer could open the eyes of thousands of people who will read it. And if you know someone who needs to stop and reflect on their own modern vices, well, you know what to do. See you in the next historical revelation. And remember, history isn't just about the past. It's a mirror of who we are today.